I'm always looking for ways to show my cat how much I love her. And with Fancy Feast gems, I can pamper her whenever I want with a savory gravy on top of a gourmet mousse pâté. The pyramid shape makes serving simple, so all I have to do is peel and plate to make mealtime feel extra fancy. And with 2 entrees in every pack, it's easy to turn every day into the extraordinary. Fancy Feast gems.
ABC Wednesdays, Shifting Gears is back.
He has arisen.
Tim Allen and Kat Dennings return in television's #1 new comedy.
What?
With a star-studded premiere including Jenna Elfman, Nancy Travis, and...
Hey, buddy!
a big home improvement reunion.
Welcome.
Oh, boy.
That guy's a tool.
Shifting Gears, new Wednesdays, 8, 7 Central on ABC, and stream on Hulu.
I do believe her in the sense that, like, back then, right, they did what they did, and then they moved on with what was the right answer. And the right answer was, my dad was my dad, she was still married, and that's how it was going to be. We drove for quite a while, and then we finally stayed at a hotel. And I texted my mom just like, hey, Mom, I love you. This doesn't change how I feel about you. And that's just looking back now, that just goes to show I was more concerned with her and her reaction and how she was handling this than I was with my own reaction.
Welcome to DNA Surprises, a podcast that delves into the world of unexpected DNA discoveries. I'm your host, Alexis Auersalt. In July 2021, my life took a surprising turn when I found out that I'm an NPE, a person who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. Join me as we explore the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. Get ready to unravel the astonishing journeys that begin with a simple DNA test. This is DNA Surprises. DNA surprises, by their very nature, change the lens through which we view family. Our raised families, our newfound families, things that seemed normal become less so. With hindsight, we gain clarity on what was there all along. In this week's episode, Angeline shares how her daughter's desire to take a DNA test fundamentally altered her understanding of her family dynamics. She shares what's helped her navigate this experience and how she balances living her truth and hiding it. Thank you for sharing your story, Angeline.
I'm Angeline, and I'm from Cincinnati. That's where we live now, and I am 50 years old. That is not a trick question. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. When I say small town, it was like a farm area. Our next door neighbors might be like 5 miles down the road. My grandmother lived across the road, which was about a mile. That was my paternal grandmother. She had 4 kids, and my dad was her youngest. And that's important because not only was the youngest, but like there was a good age gap. And so the like oldest, I think, was like 14 years older than him. And then the one closest to him was like 6 years older. I lived there with 2 older brothers. My oldest brother is 5 years older. And then my middle brother is 3 years older. So it was very much always a kind of them and us. I was very close with my mom. But I just like, we still refer to my brothers as the boys. So people in the family will be like, oh yeah, it's, Angeline and her mom and then the boys. So I just felt like there was always kind of like a divide there, which not really surprising later. My brothers I'm very different than them. My brothers favor my dad. I favor my mom. When I was about 8 years old, my parents got divorced. My middle brother and I moved with my mom to like the next county over. So maybe like 20, 30 minutes away. I just was always with my mom and very much took on like her kind of defender. When people would say something about her, I felt like I was always defending her, whereas my brothers were always with my dad.
Was there any part of you that like wanted to stay with your dad, or was it very much like you knew you were going with your mom?
Yeah, I knew I was going with my mom. I think originally I'd see my dad. I was supposed to see him like every Wednesday and then every other weekend. And I think we did that for a little bit, but like the Wednesday night was up to him to come all the way over to see us or see me. And I don't think that lasted long. I mean, I didn't have a problem with my dad when I was younger, but I was definitely a mommy's girl as well. My dad was just very kind of quiet and I would dare say like kind of passive. So I think it was easy for my mom to be like, oh no, she's busy. And so we just kind of, in a way, grew apart. But my mom pretty much jumped right into another relationship. And then that man kind of became, my father. They never actually got married, which was a bit of a faux pas. Conservative small town, Midwest in the 80s, that wasn't such a common thing. And I think that's another part where I just kind of started to be like my mom's defender because I was very aware that it wasn't looked upon well. And I felt like I was always kind of like had to be a protector of her. So my dad eventually remarried as well when I was in high school. And that changed the dynamics as well, because when my stepmom came into the story, like she was very much like, okay, we'll see you on Christmas Eve and we'll see you this time. It definitely changed things a little bit more. And she was very much favored my brothers as well.
Was there any part of you at this point that questioned your connection to your father, who you believed was your father?
Yes, actually. I mean, not to a point where I thought he wasn't my dad, but definitely, and others would notice it too, that I was just so different than my brothers and my dad. And my mom would always be quick to make comments about how I favored her side of the family. And it always referenced like my grandparents who had passed when I was very little. So I had no point of reference, but I just knew that, my lighter skin, favors, that side of the family. Whereas, my brothers favored my dad. So there were some of those factors, as well as just personality wise. There's a lot of times that I would just ask my mom, like, how in the world can he be my dad? Not thinking he wasn't, but just more like, this is crazy. Like, I have nothing in common with him. It was just easy, I think, for her to dismiss, like, oh, you're like so-and-so in my family. I even remember making jokes about like, we didn't have a milkman, but we had a Schwan man, right? That came to the farm. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm the Schwan man's daughter. But again, not ever anticipating it to be anything but that my birth certificate dad was my dad. So I get married to a great guy. And right before we got married, I'm going to call him my stepdad. He passed away unexpectedly. And I think that was kind of like a catalyst too for my husband and I. Like, I realized like, oh yeah, you're the one. And he was very supportive. And I very much knew that when we got married that I wanted to be different. I wanted to stay married. I wanted to have a family, and they were going to be my focus. So we did. We got married and we started our family. I have 3 wonderful children. We never lived close to family, either his or mine. That was, I think, a decision we made on purpose. We just kind of wanted to focus on our family. And I actually had a really good relationship with my mom. I would talk to her all the time. She got married again. And then I'd say like when my oldest daughter was in high school, like a lot of the girls or a lot of the kids, she was taking classes and was studying DNA. And she's like, wouldn't it be cool if we did an ancestry test? And so she did hers first. And my maiden name is German. There's no way around it. It is German, German, German. So when my daughter first got her test back or her results back, I was like, wow, first of all, she's not as German as I thought she would be because my husband has a lot of German in him as well. And so that was the first surprise. And then I started looking and there was one cousin of mine on my mom's side. I was like, okay, yeah. So there's only one that I named there that I really recognized. And then I didn't recognize anyone on my dad's side. But there was this really kind of odd, unique name. Like the first name was unique. And it said he was a first cousin, equivalent of a first cousin of mine. So I thought that was really interesting. He had a common last name, though. So then my second daughter also got interested, and she took the test. She actually has red hair, very pale, blue eyes. My husband has blue eyes. Okay, we always joke that she has all the recessive genes because when she was born, we're like, okay, where did this come from? Same result, obviously, some of the stuff on there. I was like, okay. So then I took the test probably, I'm going to say I probably took it in 2020, like a lot of people. When I got the results back, I actually messaged this cousin because it was on my dad's side and still no other names kind of really popped up. And I messaged him like, hey, because at that point you could put in like, where you were born. And so he made reference to the same small town that I was born in. It took him a while to message me back. And he's like, oh, there must be some kind of mistake because I know all my cousins. But my grandfather was adopted. So maybe that's how we're related. I was like, okay. But then, you start to do the mental gymnastics. And in my mind, I had created this narrative and I was like, oh, I figured it out. So because my dad, like I mentioned before, was so much younger, I was the youngest cousin on that side. And so I had cousins that were having children not long after I was born. So somehow I connected the dots that one of these cousins that lives in the same small town probably had a baby and decided to give it up for adoption. So this is the thought process that I have. This is how I've come up with the answer to who this guy is, because he lives in the same town. He knows all of his cousins. So I did actually call my mom and ask her, because she was always kind of like the cool aunt, probably because she was married to the youngest brother. So I remember it so vividly. I didn't know at the time why, but like when I said, hey mom, like I found this, is there any chance that, my cousins could have had a baby, or does this name sound familiar to you? And I gave her the name and she like had this really shrill, like, what? I don't know. Like that's impossible. And I would know. And then she also said, you can't trust those DNA tests, which was really odd because my mom is very much a woman of science. And I was like, that's just such a weird. And it's one of those things where you don't know why it's important, but you kind of like tuck it back in your mind. And so I kind of just gave up thinking, well, I don't know how I'm going to figure this out, because I just kind of had my story. And then a couple years later, one of our cousins actually passed. And so we were all gathering for a funeral. We went to the funeral and then we went to like a family farmhouse afterwards, and we were sharing a meal. All of my cousins on my dad's side were there. My brothers were there. My aunts, my dad was there as well. And again, I'm not super close with them still. Like we're cordial, but I don't see him very often. So he was there. And fortunately, he was tired from a long day of travel in the funeral. My middle brother took him and they left. And we were sitting at a table and my husband was there and my oldest brother was there. And one of my cousins started talking about how he was researching genealogy. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I wonder. I saw another cousin across the room. I'm very close with her. So I went over to her and I said, hey, do you know this person? And I gave her the name and she's like, well, no, why? And I'm like, well, I connected with him on 23andMe. And she's like, I connected with our cousin so-and-so and so-and-so. And so like, I literally pull out my phone and I start to like type in her name. I'm like, well, why aren't we connected? And then like, she looked at me and I looked at her. And it's like we both realized at the same time. And she just simply said, is there any chance that your mom had an affair with so-and-so? And right then and there, I'm like, yes, like I know she did. And then it was like memories, kind of like little glimpses of things kind of like came back to me. And I remembered, I knew my mom had an affair and I remembered who the man was.
So this was not news to you. The affair was not news to you, or had you forgotten about it, or?
I remembered it, but I think when you're so young and I didn't have words for it, and I can't even tell you exactly how I knew, but I remembered then like my mom and I talked about it only twice before. And one time was when I was married and I said, Mom, I remember something and can you, tell me about it? And she was just like, your dad and I were going through a rough patch. It only happened one time. It didn't mean anything, that kind of story. So when I was talking to my cousin, we both kind of realized this. She actually said to me then, I always thought you looked like, and then named my now half sister because they were friends. And she's like, I thought it was always odd how similar you were. And I just was like in shock, of course. And I had known my mom had an affair, but I thought that was later. I'd never contemplated that it was, because she told me it was like a one-time thing later.
How are you feeling at this point?
Well, I am obviously in shock, but also it's like one of those, it's like tunnel vision at the same time too. I'm literally standing with all of this family that I've just now realized I don't share any genetics with. And she just like, oh, I'm so sorry. So sorry. She actually had some memories because she actually stayed with us one summer when I was little before my parents got divorced. And apparently a gentleman would always call. And if my dad answered the phone, then the person would hang up. And this is, of course, before caller ID and all of that. And then I was like, oh, yeah, like I remember now, too, like being a little kid and someone calling. At that point, I just go and I whisper in my husband's ear. I'm like, we need to leave. And he's like, okay. And my brother had been watching this kind of conversation from across the room that I was having. And he knows me well enough to know that something was going on. He just wouldn't let it go. We were supposed to like spend the night and go out to breakfast with everyone the next morning. But I was like, I've got to leave. I've got to leave. And so he's like, what's going on? And I was like, I can't tell you right now. He's like, no, what's going on? And just kind of like badgering me. And I was just like, I am not related to anyone in this room except for you. And he's like, okay. He's like, do you know who you are related to? And I was like, I'm not talking to you about this right now. I could not get out of there fast enough. So my husband and I leave. And I don't even think I told my husband as we got into the truck, like what was going on. We just get in the truck and literally I immediately call my mom. And I just ask her, I'm like, Mom, is there any possibility that so-and-so is my biological father? And she just starts crying. She's like, no. I was like, Mom, like, DNA doesn't lie. Is there any chance that so-and-so is my father? And she says, this will kill your dad. And that was her reaction. And so we talked briefly and then we got off the phone and my husband was just like driving, like shocked because he's just picking things up. And then I just kind of tell him the conversation that I had and he starts driving. And we were about 6 hours from home because we were several states away. And so we just start driving. And then I call my mom back and she's settled down a little bit. I've settled down a little bit. And she gives me a little bit of information, but not much. Basically just admitting that it could be a possibility. And she's like, there's no way. I had no idea. And I do believe her in the sense that like back then, right? They did what they did. And then they moved on with what was the right answer. And the right answer was my dad was my dad. She was still married. And that's how it was going to be. We drove for quite a while and then we finally stayed at a hotel. And I texted my mom just like, hey, Mom, I love you. This doesn't change how I feel about you. And that's just looking back now, it just goes to show I was more concerned with her and her reaction and how she was handling this than I was with my own reaction.
Did you feel any anger or anything towards your mom, or were you really focused on making sure she was okay?
It was a combination of being concerned for her and still just in utter shock and also wanting answers. And like my initial thought was like, I don't need to have a relationship. I don't need to reach out to them. I just, I need to know from you. And so I was just really focused on, is she okay? And what does this mean? I was also concerned about my birth certificate dad. Like, was there any chance that he knew? But yeah, so it was crazy.
So what are your next steps? Like, do you start researching this new family that you find out that you're connected to? Do you start, interviewing your mom? How do you learn more information?
So I had memories of him. And I knew the names. I immediately knew the names of my half brother and half sister. They would be older than my siblings, my raised with siblings, but still very close in age. And they graduated from the same high school as my brother. I graduated from the high school that I moved to with my mom. Since I knew their names, I guess one blessing is I didn't have to wait to figure out who it was. Like I had memories and I knew their names. I remember their mom's name. And so, of course, I got like on Facebook and started looking things up and seeing where they were. I could figure out that the bio dad and his wife were still married and they still lived in the same little town. So that was kind of crazy. I also immediately set up like therapy appointment for like as soon as I could get it because I knew I was going to need a lot of help to like kind of walk myself through this. I gave my mom a couple of days for her to kind of like come to terms with the fact that I had figured this out. I think I even brought up like, hey, like Mom, there were times when I asked you, basically asked her about this cousin. And that would have been the time, right? To be like, oh, hey, by the way, because I'd already knew somewhat of the affair. Now, granted, it's not something we talked about, but maybe twice in my entire life. And at this point, I was 48. So this was just like two and a half years ago. I decided that my one brother knew, but my dad, who raised me, actually lives with my middle brother. And so my husband and I talked about it. And at that point, we're like, okay, we're not going to tell them. It just didn't seem like, he's older, and what good would that kind of come out of it? And I think I was still really concerned about how everybody was going to take this news. This was, of course, right before Christmas. So my mom was still planning to come visit us for Christmas and stay with us. She very much didn't want to talk about it. She didn't want anyone to know. And so we promised her that we wouldn't tell like my kids or anyone until after Christmas. And then, I just started doing therapy. There's so much grief. I was mad. I was just incredibly sad about different things in my past that could have been different. I couldn't understand how someone would love their kid and see their kid struggling in a relationship with like their dad and not kind of be honest and say, hey, there's a good chance he's not your dad, like anything. That's just the fact that she just let me continue to be in some really tough situations with my dad and my brothers when she knew I was struggling. That's really hard for me. It still is hard for me. Eventually, I told just, a couple of close friends as well, because it was clear that I was struggling. Like there's something going on, because that's something that just, it overtook my life for the first bit. But I'm a Christian, and my faith is a very big part of my life. And so I think that was also like, I still today know that I'm going to be okay. Like in that moment, I was like, all right, this is not a surprise to God. And so I took a lot of comfort in that, knowing that, okay, well, I didn't know this. It's not a surprise, and I'm going to be okay. And so that was kind of like just like my mantra for a while. Like, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, that mantra of I'm going to be okay, I'm sure is really, really helpful. I wanted to just go back really quickly to your mom. You believe she didn't know, and she wasn't sure. But you also mentioned that when you were asking her about your cousin, like that might have been a time. So do you think at some point she maybe had a question mark and didn't say anything? Or do you think that she was just as surprised as you were with this information?
Looking back, at one point when we did have a conversation the following week, the one time that she was like probably open with me for a good couple hours, at that point she did admit that there were times that she wondered, because clearly the way I looked was just different than my brothers. We always would joke about like, oh, I'm nothing like my brothers. So I do think that there was in the back of her mind, there were times where she wondered, and she maybe kind of hoped even maybe that I wasn't, because they're, after the divorce, they didn't always get along, obviously. I think there was some kind of wonder there, but I think also like so many of that generation, right? Like there was no way they were going to foresee DNA tests. So she just put it aside, and she like, okay, this is your dad. And in the state that I was born in, legally, even if she did know, like he was still going to be on my birth certificate, because that was the law. I think it still is the law that if you're married, the husband,
that's the father,
is the father.
Yeah.
And so, and I know that's a real controversial take for some people, like other NPEs. For me, I just look at my birth certificate as a legal document of what was legal at that time. So it doesn't bother me like it bothers some people. And that's, everybody has a right to their own opinion. So yeah, but yeah, there had to have been glimpses in her to know like, oh yeah, there's, 50-50, right?
Right. Okay. Wow.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least that was the plan. Except now the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it?
easy with a new Galaxy Watch 8. Sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
So you told some friends, you told your therapist, you told your brother in the moment, your husband knows, your mom obviously knows. What do you decide to do with the information that you have? Do you decide to reach out to anyone, or what are your next steps?
So my next steps were, at first I was like, I only want medical history. That's all I care about. I'm like, I don't want to cause an issue for anyone since they're still married. I don't want to do that. I don't want to blow up any families. So I started to write a letter to my bio dad. And since I had some memories of him, like it wasn't hard to write that letter. I knew his birthday was coming up in early February. And so this happened, like my discovery was early December. So I started writing my letter, and then like I find journaling and writing very therapeutic to the point where a lot of times like my first reaction is like just to write an email, to write out like what I really want to say, and then I'll edit it and soften it. Or sometimes I don't send it at all, but that's just very therapeutic. So I worked on that letter, and it wasn't a very long letter, but I just really would add things and take things away. And then I actually sent the letter in for his birthday. I tucked it into a birthday card because I thought, well, I don't know who gets his mail or, what kind of mental and physical condition he's in, because he would have been, in his 80s, early 80s. So so I sent the letter, and then I waited. And at some point after Christmas, I did tell my girls too, because I was very much, was not going to keep that from them, because medical history, it's as important to them as it is to me to have that right. And I mean, we're a very close family, and I'm sure they could tell that something was up with mom. So after my mom left, we just sat him down and told him the truth. So my mom was furious with us because she didn't want anybody to know her business. So that's how she looks at it. This was her business from 50 years ago, and they had no right to know that. That was the first time that I had to put some real strict boundaries down with my mom, and it took some time because it's almost like scales fell from my eyes, in the sense that I started to look back now at my relationship with my mom and some other things and realized, oh, maybe things were not the way they should have been for a long time. Which is interesting because my husband, he's like, honey, that's how your mom has always been. But I was just so caught up in that I was her daughter and that, I was her best friend. I think we kind of had it messed up for a while in terms of who was taking care of who.
Yeah.
And so
I hear that a lot in our community, that parentified child enmeshment kind of just, really fuzzy boundaries that end up happening. And I'm sure it's common outside of the NPE community as well, but it's just a recurring theme.
Yeah. So I sent the letter, and then I just kind of waited. And then about a month after I sent the letter, I got an email from my brother, my new half brother, just saying basically, hey, saw your letter and would like to talk to you. And he's like, and he was very kind. He's like, I hope you're doing okay. And of course, they had gone on to Facebook too and checked me out and whatnot. So we scheduled a call for a couple days later. So he called me, and I was so nervous. I think I was nervous because there's a fear of rejection for part of it. You don't want to blow up their family, but also he was like the gateway in a way as well to the history, to, what did they know? What didn't they know? So they were in shock, basically. He said it's totally out of character for their dad, had no idea. But apparently when the letter arrived, my sister was actually there and read it. And then my bio dad read it, and his wife read it. And then they called the brother, and he read it as well. So that was kind of weird to think that like they were all reading it and just kind of like stewing on it before they reached out. So at first it was great. Like, we started to, get to know each other. They answered, some questions. And again, they just were like totally shocked. And they were very protective of their mom, which I understand. So they didn't want to tell anyone because they still live in that small town and what would people think? And so apparently she had no idea. And so it caused a bit of a rift. And the only thing my bio dad, I guess, said was like, yeah, it's a possibility, but I don't know what the big deal is. It was like 50 years ago.
How do you feel about that? I mean, it's your life, it's your existence.
Yeah, at first I was like, oh yeah, of course, I don't want to cause any problems or issues, which seems to be a pattern with me now. I'm realizing I'm so careful about everybody else. And, it's like, okay, we'll give him some time. And then, so I talked to my half brother first. And then about a month later, he said, our sister would like to talk to you as well. And so she called me, but it was also always very secretive, like couldn't be around the parents, like, when they were away. And they have grown children, but they didn't want them to know because they didn't want their children to think poorly of their grandfather and their grandmother. At first it was great. Like we were like had a group text going and like getting to know each other and sharing memories. And some things would kind of come up, like we were sharing a memory and I was at my brother's baseball game and my new half brother was like, oh yeah, and you got bit by a dog. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, I remember that. And I was like, wow, like I don't even remember it as much as I remember the story. So there were definitely some connection points there. And my cousin who, helped me kind of piece this together, she's the one that said, yeah, like you guys look alike. And then I started to notice it. It wasn't like the full on, like, genetic mirroring that you hear, but definitely I have more features than I do of my brothers that I was raised with, like the lighter skin, because to find out I am in fact not German. So I have a lot of
so not
Irish.
At all? No German?
No German. So I have a lot of Irish and Scottish. So that explains a few things. And then actually my husband and I drove out to re-meet my brother and sister in early June. We met on a day when no one else was home and it went really, really well at the time. And at that point, I remember I describing contentment. I had contentment that I'd met them and that they just needed some more time. It sounded like my bio dad wasn't interested in meeting me. As a parent, I don't understand that. Like, I don't understand how you can have someone, whether you knew or not, just out there and you don't want to meet them at least once. But so I've not had any contact with my bio dad still to this day.
Is that something that you really are wanting, or how do you feel about it at this point?
It comes and goes. Sometimes I just want the opportunity one time to see him in person, to see if I do have a reaction. I've seen pictures, but it's just not the same. So in the same way, I haven't seen my birth certificate dad either since I found out. And I want to see him again as well, because I want to see if that's something that's different or if it's the same feeling that I've always had. But yeah, like my half brother has been very kind of like businesslike, like, yes, like if you want to meet him, we'll make it happen. But apparently my sister is very much avoids conflict. And so anytime it even is brought up, I feel like a little bit of a freeze. So our conversations have been like fewer and fewer between. So I don't know at this point. I kind of, sometimes, especially like at holidays or those trigger points, I do want to see him. But then there's other times where I'm like, oh, well, if he doesn't want to meet me, then why would I want to meet him? But then that's not true. I know it's just kind of a protection of, not wanting to be rejected.
Sure. What do your siblings say about him? Like, I guess it just seems like it must feel very complicated that your siblings are willing to talk to you and they met you, and then their father, your father, is not willing to bridge that gap.
Yeah, it is very complex. And I understand them wanting to protect their mom and that her well-being, she's a victim in this too. But at the same time, like, who's looking out for me? And that does hurt. I think that's kind of another reason why I kind of pulled back a little bit, because I got to the point like, well, you want to know all about me and my family, but you aren't willing to share anything of yours. And that just doesn't feel fair. I know it's not going to be fair, but There are days where I'm like, oh, I don't ever need to talk to them again. And then there's other days where I'll see something on Facebook because we're friends on Facebook, but we're not allowed to comment or share anything or heart anything because someone else might see it and wonder, which that's kind of what I'm dealing with. So, and that's where it feels very like voyeuristic.
Yeah. If it was up to you, would you be open about it? Because I know your mom also doesn't really want her business out there. So where do you stand? Would you, Angeline, talk about this broadly if you could, or what are your feelings?
Yes. About a year from when I originally sent the letter, I sent a text to them just saying, hey, I'm not going to send a letter this year. I'm not going to send a birthday card. I'm well aware of the date and I'm well aware of the truth. And while I can tell you right now, I'm not going to do anything, I can't promise that's always going to be the case because it's my story to tell. And when I'm ready to tell it, I'm going to tell it. I think they took it maybe as a threat. I didn't mean it as a threat, but because I did notice like they definitely kind of pulled back and we're all busy. I still have, one kid that's not driving at home. So I'm, very involved and they have things going on in their lives. But I just feel like, I feel cheated really out of what could have been, what should have been, what could be.
Yeah, that's such a good way of saying it. If you could have a conversation with your biological father, what would you want to say to him? What questions do you have?
Kind of what I wrote in my letter was like, did you know? Did you suspect anything? I don't understand how they couldn't suspect something, but yeah, did you know? Did you think about me? Did you ever want to reach out? And now that I understand wanting to upset your wife and current family, would you like to hear about your grandkids? Like I have these 3 amazing children. I can't imagine someone not wanting to know them. So yes, I'd like to know that. And I'd like to know how did you look my dad in the eye? Because, we all live near each other. My dad and my bio dad, they continued to be in the same community for decades. Like, listen, I understand people make mistakes or things happen, but a simple I'm sorry would go so far. And that's another thing. My mom has never apologized for anything really, but she just, when I bring it up, she just says, I'm not sorry because I have you. I'm not sorry because I still have you. So her lack of accountability is a real trigger for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you still have questions for her?
Yes, but I've come to terms with the fact that I'll never have the answers. And there's going to be a lack of trust there, probably. We've kind of ebb and flow through our relationship the last 2 years because I don't think once the gates opened and I started to say my piece, I felt like I couldn't say enough. And so I think that was a shock to her that I was finally, hey, what about this? What about that? And she didn't want to deal with that. So, and to this day, my one brother that I was raised with, he knows. He's told a few people, but my brother who my dad lives with, my birth certificate dad lives with, does not know because that's a very complex situation. Like, because I don't want to ask him to keep that from my dad, and I'm at the point where I'm ready to tell him, but others are like, no, because that would be too hard for him to keep, or he's just gonna bother your mom with it. I didn't even tell anyone I was doing this podcast because I don't want to hear anyone else's opinions. Like, I want to be able to share what I need to share for myself, for my kids to eventually listen to, and for others.
What advice do you have for a parent who's keeping a DNA surprise from their child?
My advice is it's going to catch up with you. So go ahead and be honest and tell them, especially like if your kids are like I was, and although they didn't have any suspicions, they were still asking questions. Like, I look back and there were a few very key points where my mom should have shared, said, hey, I don't know for sure, but there's a possibility. Or, hey, you're feeling this way probably because, there might be a chance. And then we could have figured it out together.
Yeah, that's such a important call out, is that especially when you're an adult, there's an opportunity to work through it together and heal together. And it's important. Yeah. And what advice do you have for someone like yourself who has uncovered a DNA surprise?
So my first, and I think this is a common response, is to take a minute for yourself, breathe, and then also feel the feelings. I very much gave myself permission to feel the feelings, and thanks to my therapist, help name the feelings. So if I was mad, I said it, I'm mad. If I was sad or, I'm feeling this way, I've got tears, I'm sad because of this. And I would allow myself to kind of sit in those feelings, but I also wouldn't stay there. So I'd be like, all right, today I'm going to, usually it was daily. I'm going to let myself be mad and rage because they're still going to be there. So if you don't acknowledge them, they're going to creep up on and get you. So I think that's part of it, is just take your time, feel the feelings, give yourself permission to change your mind. So for me in the beginning, I was like, I don't want to, I'm not going to reach out. I don't want to do this. But that's, I think, was a reaction to how I was worried about how it was going to work out for my mom or what it was going to mean for other people. So I needed to give myself permission to be like, you know what, it's okay that I'm going to change my mind, because this is there's no guidebook for this. And so we're going to figure it out as we go. And if that means later I want to do something differently, then that's what I'm going to do. So I think that's important. Give yourself permission to change your mind and how you deal with this. And then if I could say one more, figure out what's true to you. So for me, I always said, I know I'm going to be okay. I know I'm going to be okay. I know I'm loved, and I know I'm going to be okay. And so the rest of it sometimes was just like chatter. Sometimes it was really loud, and other times it died down. But I would just be like, okay, nope, I'm going to be okay. This really hurts, but I'm going to be okay. So that's what I'd recommend, is that just kind of figure out what's true to you, for you, and just focus on that.
That was all such good advice. Every bit of it. I especially love the naming your feelings, because there's so many feelings that we feel when we go through this, and being able to really identify what they are and then move through them. Like you said, not staying stuck there, because sometimes you need to be angry for a while, but it doesn't feel good to be angry for long, right? And so, and sometimes it comes back and sometimes it leaves, and just to let yourself feel all of the feelings. Angeline, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story. I think it's so important to highlight these different kinds of journeys and experiences that people have. And yours has a lot of nuance and complexity with who knows and who doesn't know. And there's still some level of uncertainty about what the future looks like for you. But I wish you nothing but the best as you continue to figure it out and work through it.
Thank you so much. And I know a lot of guests say this, but really your podcast, it is so important, the work, because this is such an isolating feeling. And my husband loves me dearly, and he wants to be supportive, and he has been, but there's no way that he can understand or feel what I'm feeling. But just listening to the podcast and knowing that there's a community out there, it is so incredibly important. So I really appreciate you taking your time to have me on, and just continue to do what you do.
Thank you so much. Thanks again to Angeline for sharing her story. If you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, please submit your story at dnasurprises.com. And for early, ad-free access to episodes, join me over on Patreon at patreon.com/DNA Surprises. Until next time. This episode of DNA Surprises was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Alexis Auerselt. It was mixed and mastered by Josh Auerselt of Siren Recording Studios.